Very beautiful. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, let's turn to the book of Exodus and the 20th chapter, and we're going to look at verse number 12. Exodus chapter 20 and verse number 12. Boy, I have been blessed this morning. I hope you have been as well. I'm thankful for folks that are gifted in areas that I'm not, and they use those giftings for God's glory, and I just get to be a part of that, and I appreciate our worship team leading us to the throne of grace in worship and music this morning. Exodus chapter 20 and verse number 12, we're going to look this morning at a simple law to live by, honoring father and mother. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you a promise this morning. I recognize that not much of anything I'm going to say, if anything at all, is going to be original or new, because somebody's preached this message 1,000 times more eloquently than I can, and it's also quite simple, isn't it? In fact, I was commenting to Miss Kelly last night when we were sitting at home after the day's long events. I said, there's just not a lot there. There's not a lot to preach on. And she said, okay, keep that in mind tomorrow, okay? And so here's my promise to you, all right? I'm not going to say in 1,000 words what I can say in 50, all right? I'm going to do my best to stay directly to the point and draw our conclusions and see where we go from there, okay? We are working our way in this series, Law to Live By, and we're trying to answer two questions. The first question is, how do I love God? What does that look like? And remember that we've looked at four things to this point of what it means to love God. And loving God, first of all, was believing or making Him central to living. That is, that everything revolves around Him in the home and not the other way around. Second of all, we know Him personally. We don't fall in love with the concept of God, but rather we love Him personally as He's made Himself known supremely in the incarnation of His Son, Jesus Christ. And I don't know if we fully grasp how great a truth that is. We are the only religion of the world where the worshiper doesn't come to God, but God came to the worshiper in the incarnation of His Son. Thirdly, to love God means that we honor Him in our living and speech. We don't take His name in vain. Fourthly, loving God means that we dedicate time for corporate worship and reflection upon Him on a regular basis. Now, this week we begin to turn our attention to this last six laws in this series, and they answer the question, how do I love my neighbor? I suppose this morning the word neighbor carries with it certain connotations, doesn't it? So that it may be more proper to say that we're really asking the question, how do I learn to love the people that are around me? How do I learn to live with the people that are around me on a regular basis? Certainly, we don't think of mother and father in the terms of neighbor, and yet that's the question we're trying to answer. How do I learn to love and to live with the people who are around me? As we look at these commands, these next six commands, we're going to see that they cause us to examine our relationships with all the people that are around us, all the way from our personal relationships that are in the home out to our less personal relationships that are taking place maybe at work or outside of the home, maybe our neighbors, so on and so forth. This morning what I want to do is I want to begin this discussion with the simple command in verse number 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. Parents are interesting creatures, aren't they? When you think about it. I mean, before we even get into this, just think about who your parents are and what you are as a parent. No one in our life shapes us more than our parents do. For good or for bad, nobody in our life shapes us more than our parents do. When we're first born, we are totally dependent upon our parents. We're looking to them for nourishment, for strength, for support. We're looking to them for protection. We are literally helpless except for our parents. Then after we're born, we get into those children years, right? And in the children years, our parents are our superheroes, I thought as a child that my mom was the most beautiful woman in the world, and my dad could do no wrong. My dad was my superhero. In fact, I just shared with a member last night as we were sitting at a graduation. I love this stage in life. I love this stage in my life because in my child's eyes, I can do no wrong. Everything is perfect with Dad in Isaiah's eyes. And one day that's all going to change because right now he's the only one in our home that believes that to be the case, right? I mean, we're sitting around last night, and I said, I'm going to go to this last graduation. I shouldn't say sitting around. We had just gotten home. I said, I'm going to go to the next graduation. I got to change clothes. And Isaiah says, but Dad, I want to go with you. And I said, son, you are going to be bored out of your mind. And he says, no, I won't. I'll be with you. Well, I appreciate the sentiment, son, but Dad's going to be bored out of his mind, so you're going to be bored out of your mind as well, okay? That's the way these things work. One day you'll appreciate it more. But that's the way these things work. But in his eyes, I can do no wrong. I'm a superhero, and we were all like that too with our parents. Then comes those pesky teenage years, right? Whereas students, we are now embarrassed by our parents. And students, let me give you a little clue. The feeling is mutual, okay? Your parents are embarrassed by you as well. It's a mutual agreement that the two of you are going to have for several years to come. Then you get through those teenage years and you get into that young adult age, right? And you start thinking about marriage, and you get through college and you start kind of planning out life, and you've got the bull by the horns. And at that point in life, you just want to be the opposite of what your parents were to you, right? You notice the transition? First we're dependent, then we love and adore them, then we're embarrassed by them, and then we want to be somebody other than them. Then all of a sudden you get to a stage in life where you start having your own kids. And you start thinking, especially in those moments when you have had enough and you want a babysitter, you start thinking to yourself, maybe mom and dad knew a few more things than I realized, right? And you start to lean on them a little bit more, and you start asking them for a little bit of their advice and their judgment and their wisdom. Maybe not a lot, because you're not yet ready and willing to let them know that they really know more, but you're at least willing to ask them and to seek after them. And I want you to hold on to that, parents, because I'm going to come back to that one in a moment. You begin to say, okay, maybe they knew a little bit more than I was expecting. Then the years go on, and you start to get older, and they're getting older. And I think as those years go on, you start to appreciate them more and more, until one day they're not there anymore, and you realized just how much you had in your mom and dad. Parents are interesting creatures because they go through this whole cycle in our lifespans. From a time when we're totally dependent on them and love them and adore them, to times when we are embarrassed and we want nothing to do with them, to then at the end of life when we're saying, boy, I'd like to have had just one more day, one more hour, one more month with them, because there was so much there that I missed. With all that said, I can think of nothing in life that brings greater joy and satisfaction than being a parent. There's nothing that I have enjoyed in my life to this point more than having a couple of kids that look like me, sound like me, adore me. I mean, I know it's a little bit prideful, but I like that they have my name. There's something satisfying, there's something fulfilling in being able to look in their eyes and know, hey, I did this, I created this, right? You know? And then later on you're like, yeah, I created this, my foot, you did this, right? You know? But there's nothing more satisfying, nothing more joyful than to be able to look in those eyes, and only a parent understands that. Exodus chapter 20, verse number 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land of the Lord your God is giving to you. The command is so relatively simple on the surface. The word honor means to regard with respect or to hold in esteem. To honor father and mother is to consider our parents worthy of our respect, or to hold them in a place of esteem in our hearts. It is not contingent upon their ability. It's not contingent upon their righteousness. It's not contingent upon their rightness, but rather it is simply a command that is given to us to show honor and respect, to hold in esteem those whom God has given to us as mother and father. I was thinking of this little word honor last night as we were going through the graduation service, and one of the things that I really liked about the Smith-Cotton graduation was that there was a man that was brought in from active duty that had not seen his child, his daughter, in 7 years. And as she walked off the stage having received her diploma, he came from around the corner and surprised her, and there was this beautiful moment where there was an embrace and tears, and the whole auditorium stood up and began to cheer. And the reason they cheered was because they wanted to bestow on the man the honor that he was worthy of, the respect that he was worthy of. They wanted to hold him in the esteem, recognizing that he had sacrificed to be gone, to be on active duty, recognizing that his family had sacrificed to be for him to be gone. And now in this moment, there was a crowd of people who were giving him the honor, the esteem, the regard, the respect that he was worthy of. I thought it was a great mental picture for me, or a visible picture for me, of what honor really looks like. When we honor father and mother, we are giving them a distinct place. We're giving them esteem. We're giving them respect and dignity that is worthy of them because God has created them as mother and father. Now, this command is a little bit different from the rest because this command comes with a promise with it as well, right? All of the other commands were just simply said, you are to do this or you're not to do this, with no other tagline. But this command comes to us with a promise in response. God said in this moment, if you will honor father and mother, then your days will be long in the land that the Lord is giving to you. In other words, if you will honor your father and mother, there's going to be a reciprocal effect that you are going to receive something. Now, the Apostle Paul picks this up, and he writes about this in Ephesians 6 in verses 1 to 3, as he writes that God was giving to us the first command of promise, and he says that it may go well with you. That you would honor father and mother, that it may go well with you. And so what he does here is he brings to our forefront that there are two basic interpretations in play here. The first is this, and it is in the immediate. God was promising these specific people, these Hebrew people, that contingent upon their enjoyment of the promised land was their honoring of their father and their mother. Picture it like this. If you have ever wanted something so bad, and then all of a sudden one day you get it, and you say, this isn't quite as great as I expected, that is the conundrum that is in front of these people in this moment. That is what is a real possibility. They have wanted the promised land for several centuries, and they have wanted it so bad that they're about willing to do anything that it would take to get it. But God knows that if they get there and they have the wrong attitude, the wrong mindset when they get there, the promised land is never going to be what they wanted it to be. And so in this moment, what he's doing is he's laying out an understanding, a change that has to take place in their minds. They've got to begin to think in different terms so that when they get to the promised land, it will be what it needs to be for them. You see, the people longed for the land that God had promised, but he knew that unless they inherited the land on his terms, they wouldn't ever be satisfied with what he was giving to them. That was true of this law, and it's true of all of the laws of life here that are given to us. If I could be really clear with you this morning, most of the time, people go into life and they think to themselves, if I just had what I wanted, I'd be satisfied. If I could just have this over here, then I would be joyful. If I could just have this over here, then I wouldn't want anything else. But what God was trying to teach them, and us as well, is that that's not the way this works. God was giving his law not to be a dictator, but rather he was giving his law because he knew what was best for man. And he knew what was best for these folks, and he knows what is best for us. And therefore, my greatest satisfaction, my greatest fulfillment is when I am living under God's law, when I'm living under his command, when I'm living under his rule. Oftentimes we think that our happiness is first and foremost in our lives, and then we consider God's commands. But he was saying in this moment, you've got to stop thinking that way. You've got to think on these terms. We have to think about what he wants, knowing that what he wants is what's best for our life. And therefore, in this specific case, what God was doing was he was telling the people that there was an inherent blessing for them in the land if they were willing to fulfill this command, and that was to honor their father and their mother. There's a second interpretation that is the one Paul brings in Ephesians 6. And that is that the Jews understood these verses to speak about how life in general becomes better, more fulfilled, longer as it were, when we honor father and mother. Growing up, I heard pastors always say it like this. They'd say, if you want to live to be 150 years old, you got to honor father and mother. You'll have long days if you honor father and mother. And I always thought, I don't want to live till I'm 150 years old, so why worry with this command, right? Paul is bringing in an understanding here that is greater than age. He is bringing in Ephesians 6 a picture of how life is better when we live under God's rule, specifically this rule when we honor father and mother. It's easy to see how that's the case when you're a 4-year-old boy living in the Guffey home. Here's what I mean. When you do what Dad wants, guess what you get? You get ice cream. You get 2 scoops of ice cream. You get double chocolate from Baskin-Robbins and mint chocolate chip in one bowl, right? Amen? That's something special. On the other hand, when you disobey what Dad has said, then guess what happens? You get disciplined. And I oftentimes think and say to him, do you really want this? I mean, do you really think this is fun? I mean, I don't think it's fun. You're crying. I'm mad. Mom's yelling at me like it's my fault. I mean, does anybody happy in this situation? It's easy to see how life goes better when we honor mother and father as a 4-year-old child. The problem becomes, what about when we get to be an adult? What Paul was saying in Ephesians 6 and what the people needed to realize here in Exodus chapter 20 is that this principle of honoring mother and father is a lifelong principle. When we honor our parents, life is better, whether we're 4, 40, or 400. When we honor our parents, life is just better. We are in some way blessed by God in a special way. Now, those are the basic interpretations. That's the basic understanding of what's going on here. But I do think there's a little bit more in play that I want to show you. And I want you to hang with me. First of all, we got to remember our context. God is bringing the people out of Egypt, out of bondage, out of slavery, into a land that has been promised to them for several centuries. And as a result of their slavery, God is changing the way the people think. They are coming into this new land, and God is giving them a new mindset. You are to operate differently than you've ever operated before. You are to love God differently than you have ever seen the Egyptians love their gods. Now, as we're coming into this, he's saying you are to honor your parents differently than what you saw in Egypt. Not only that, you are to love your neighbor. You are to live at peace with the people around you in a different way than you have seen in Egypt. The immediate step from loving God comes to honoring parents in the list of his law. And it shows us a correlation. He goes directly from love God in these ways, honor God, do this and do this, do not take his name in vain, to love or honoring parents for a specific reason. There's a correlation there, and I want to show it to you. The correlation is what our parents are to us. Here's what I mean. Honoring parents is really about authority. God has spoken, first of all, about the greatest authority in these people's lives, and that is himself, as the one who has delivered them out of Egypt. But now, he wants to speak to them about his authority that he has placed in their life on the most basic level. The way you love and honor your parents will be, according to him, in this moment, a way in which you honor and love God himself. You see, mom and dad are given to us, given to kids, for the purpose of showing God. I want you to think in these terms this morning. If you thought that I was going to preach at your kids about what they should be doing in the family, you are dead wrong. This is more of a sermon about what mom and dad should be doing and how to get that honor than it is anything else, because I want you to think about some things this morning. First of all, I want you to think about this truth. Oftentimes in life, here's what mom and dad do. We send our kids to school. We send them to Sunday school. We send them to youth group. We send them to the pastor. We send them all these places, and we don't take the time to invest in them. Yet mom and dad, as the authority of the home, were given to the children as the first representation of the nature and character of God. That means you are the visible form. You are the visible representation. That does not mean you get to go home and look at your kids and say, the preacher said, I'm God today, okay? That's not what I'm saying. You are the first representation of God's nature and character to your home. That means that when your kids screw up and when they mess up, you cannot blame the youth pastor. You cannot blame the children's minister. You can't blame the Sunday school teacher. It is your responsibility to be living out the nature and character of God in your home to your kids. Because of that, then God says, as children, you are to honor mother and father so that your days may be longer, so that life may go well with you. To put it in a negative sense, this is what he would be saying. If you can't honor parents who are physically visible and present with you, how will you ever honor God who is the invisible? The correlation, the reason this, I believe, comes directly after his statements about how we are to honor God and how we are to love God is because as God's representative parents, we are to have honor from our kids, and in their giving of honor, we are teaching them how to honor God himself. God gives us as a representation of himself, as an extension of his own authority, and therefore to honor our parents is to honor him. But that's not the whole truth here. There's more to it than even that. The promise connected to the command tells us something more. He says, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving to you. The way it's worded is it is a collective promise that transcends the individual. When we read these words, we think to ourselves, God is talking directly to me. And he does speak directly to you. But there is an immediate context in which he is dealing with something specific. And what is he dealing with specific? He is dealing with a new nation, what we will call the nation of Israel. He's dealing with them as a people, as a corporate group, and what he is saying transcends the individual members and has something for the whole. Here's what I mean. He was promising to the nation, to the people as a whole, that they will have many days in the land as a result of their honoring of their parents. They would have many days in the promised land if they would honor their parents. Why is that so important? Well, because what God was doing is he was speaking about what honor looks like. And honoring parents in this context actually has more to do with something that you and I would call legacy than it does anything else. Let me explain it to you like this. You see, for good or bad, I am forever associated with the name Guffey. In some circles, this is a great honor. This is a great thing. In other circles, it probably carries with it negative connotations. And the same will be true of my children and my children's children. And when they go out, they are bearing my name, and honoring me means honoring that name. Likewise, when I go out, I am either honoring my parents' name or I am dishonoring it. And therefore, I am either honoring them or dishonoring them. Therefore, what God was saying in this moment as he speaks about this is he's saying, you need to remember the legacy, the heritage that you received from your parents. In this moment, these folks, their children are going to be the first people to come into the promised land. They are going to be the first people to realize what has been promised for over 600 years. Their grandchildren are going to be the firstborn in this nation. Their great-grandchildren are going to be the first grandchildren in the nation. And the list goes on and on from there. And somewhere along the way, there must have been a moment, or there would come a moment where the people might be tempted to forget where they had come from, what God had done in their family's heritage, what God had done in their family's lives, and therefore, the moment they forgot, they would despise the nation, and God would be saying in the negative sense, you will not have many days in the land. The reason he connects the promise here in this moment is because the moment the people stopped honoring their parents, the moment they began to dishonor them was the moment they had forgotten who they were, and the moment they had forgotten who they were, they would lose that which they had been given. Here's where I want to go with this. Here's what I want you to understand. That what God was saying in this moment about honoring parents was about what happens in our legacy, what happens in our heritage. I ran across this story of a Boston pastor who was president of the Lord's Day League, and he was a well-known speaker in the area, and he would oftentimes speak on temperance. He was also known for being gifted for humor, like the pastor at Cornerstone Baptist Church. And he would use sometimes a specific story, and he would tell about how a clerk employed by the governor had an opportunity to send his son to the governor's mansion for dinner. He would tell this story, and it would go something like this, that the boy's mother prepared him for the great occasion. This was a great honor to go to the governor's mansion. And just before he left for dinner, the clerk, the father of the boy, took him aside and he said, "Son, you are now going to the governor's mansion. Remember, my reputation is in your hands. What you choose to do tonight, in other words, will be a direct impact, will be a direct reflection on who I am." After telling this story, the temperance speaker would oftentimes emphasize the fact that God's reputation is in our hands as His children. He has given us His name, His reputation, and it's in our hands to do something with it. Then all of a sudden, one day in this pastor's life, something happened unexpected. The papers were filled with the story of how the minister's son had brought disgrace to the family name. He was driving the family car one Sunday while he was drunk, and he killed a man, and much to the agonized shame of his father, who had preached against drunkenness and Sabbath breaking all of those years. Shortly after that, the ministers were giving a dinner to which they wanted to invite the minister and allow him to come and speak. But because of the tragedy in their life, they were afraid to do so. They felt, however, because he'd been so important to this league for all these years, they should go ahead and give him the invite anyway, and they did, and so he came. They asked him to speak a few words, and this time he did something different. He told no jokes. He indulged in no humor. He simply repeated the story that he had told 1,000 times before, of a son who was told by his father, "Remember, my reputation is in your hands." He got done with that story, and everyone was in silence. They understood the point that he was trying to make. Everybody understood it was like a message from heaven. True it is that when the privilege goes, also the duty to uphold God's honor goes with it. His reputation is in our hands. The Boston preacher was trying to relate to the people a story through his own life, as it were, to say to the people, listen, your reputation, or God's reputation, is in your hands. The reason I tell that as a part of this is because the reason God wanted these children to honor father and mother was because God's reputation was in their hands. Their parents' reputation was in their hands. And the moment they stopped remembering what God had done and how He had brought them through this, brought them out of the land of Egypt into the promised land, would be the moment that the nation would be despised and fall into despair. Boy, there's a message in itself for the United States of America, isn't it? Maybe we have reached a crossroads as a nation where we have forgotten how we have gotten here. Maybe we have reached a crossroads where we have forgotten because we have not heeded the instruction of our parents, because we have not honored father and mother. Maybe I can illustrate it even a little bit better like this. A couple of months ago, I got some wild idea in my mind. Late one evening, I guess insomnia had gotten the best of me, to go on Ancestry.com. You know, I thought about the fact that as a nation or as a people, oftentimes we never look back anymore. We never look at our heritage. We never look at our roots. And I wanted to ask a question. I wanted to know something. I wanted to know when Christianity was introduced to the Guffey home, because it was just something that I had never really known the story of. Let me back it up and tell you a little bit of our story. My grandfather his mother passed away when he was a young child. Growing up on a farm, plowing the fields with a horse-drawn plow. He quit school at 7th grade, never finished the 7th grade. Ended up going into World War II and serving in the Philippine Islands. And he met this beautiful woman and decided to get married. And as soon as he was back from the war, they were going to get married. And she said, the only way I'm going to marry you is if you promise to go to church with me. So, unlike many husbands today, he kept his word. He showed up the very first Sunday they were married, showed up, and the very first Sunday he was there, he made a profession of faith, was saved, and it changed our family dramatically. But I knew his story, and I knew that before that, as a child, his father was very difficult. Very, very difficult to deal with. Struggled with alcohol abuse and other problems. Just was a real slave driver to his own kids. What I knew before that was that my grandfather's grandfather was even harder on his sons. So you can see the transition, right? My great-great-grandfather was difficult on my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was difficult on my grandfather. My grandfather was difficult on my dad. You can draw the rest of the lines from there. So I started thinking, I thought, okay, if my grandfather got converted when he first got married to my grandmother, where did Christianity really come in? So I spent hours upon hours researching our family history. And if you've never been on Ancestry.com, listen, try the first 30 days for free, then get rid of your credit card because it's way too much after that. You get 1,000 hints every 3 minutes about your heritage. Some of them real, some of them fake, some of them good, some of them bad. I traced our heritage all the way back to England and found a baptismal certificate for I don't even know how many greats it would have been on the would be a grandmother of a daughter, right? I traced our heritage all the way from England into the United States, from the United States all the way into Illinois specifically, and here's what I noticed. Every descendant had a Christian name. There were names like Rehoboam and Judah and Ephraim and all of these Christian names until my great-great-grandfather did not name any of his children a Christian name. Then my grandfather didn't name any of my great-grandfather did not name any of his kids a Christian name. You know what I found out? What I found out in the process was that one man made a decision to reject Christ, and it had an impact on 3 generations of Guffeys. I'm thankful that my grandfather married my grandmother and got saved. I'm thankful that God came back and did not stop pursuing my family. But one man's decision impacted 3 generations of Guffeys. Here's the point I'm trying to make. When God gave this command, honor father and mother, and it will give you, in the land that he is giving to you, the days will go well with you. What God was promising in that moment is, if you will honor father and mother, you will honor the heritage of what has brought you to here, specifically of me bringing you to here, and therefore you will not be a nation in despise, but you will be a nation that is blessed by my hand. It was about a corporate legacy that was in play. I don't know, maybe it's hard to follow all of this, but basically what God was doing in that moment was he was saying, I want you to be blessed. I want you to be fulfilled. I'm going to give you this land and it will be yours for many, many days and it will go well with you. But in order to do so, you got to remember where you came from, and that begins with honoring father and mother. Now, having said all of that, let's pull the scab off, because here's the problem. As we work our way through all of that, there's someone in the room, probably multiples, that say, you know what? What do I do with the fact that my parents weren't a good example? What do I do with the fact that my parents, my immediate context, they didn't set the right example? They weren't the representation that God had designed them to be. Well, the answer to that question lies in what honoring means. As a child, to honor is almost synonymous with obedience. The best way Isaiah can honor me is by being obedient to me. But because of that, because we think that those two terms are almost synonymous, it darkens our understanding in future life. Here's what I mean. Honor and obedience are 2 separate issues. They may work together at times, but they are not synonymous for one another. And I want to be careful here, but I also want to be clear with you this morning. I've preached on this multiple times and been extensive in the book of Ephesians in chapter 6, but let me just kind of refresh your memory and make sure we're on the same page. When marriage takes place, there is a new family unit that is formed. The unit that previously existed is no longer holding the authority over the new unit. That's how we know we have been released from obedience. Okay? Here's what I mean in practical terms. When I assumed responsibility for my wife, she became mine to love and to cherish all the days of our life. When her dad gave her to me, he said, you know what you're doing, right? You're going to provide for her. You're going to take care of her. You're going to make sure there's food on the table. She is yours. I am giving her to you. Are you sure that you're willing to take this kind of responsibility? Here's what happens in our world, because maybe we've been influenced by pop culture. We think in our culture that mom and dad still have a right to reach back into that family unit and speak to them. And this is where it gets difficult in honoring parents, because we think, hey, I have a right to talk to my kids. They're still my kids. They might be married. They might have their own kids, but I ought to be telling them what to do. Listen, mom and dad, you have mother-in-law and father-in-law, you have no right to speak into their lives. Let me say it again. You do not have the right. A new family unit was formed at marriage. Now, you maybe they should seek after your wisdom, But when they got married, they joined a new family unit. So honoring you does not mean that they have to be obedient to what you say. Oh, I knew it was going to get quiet really fast. By the way, this is why murder is the next law on the list. Here's what happens. We think in our world, I should speak into my kids' life. They're my kids my whole life. You don't have that right, mother and father-in-law. Your kids should seek your wisdom. And if they're good, if they're wise, if they're smart, they'll seek your wisdom. But when they have formed a new family unit, they have taken on that responsibility. I said to my wife this morning, I said, I was thinking about all this, and I said, if I had known all of this then, 11 years ago, if I had known all that I was signing up for, I'm not sure I would have done it. And she said, right back at you, bud, I mean, I cannot stress this enough to married couples as they're entering into marriage. We've fallen in love in our society with a concept. I want to be married, I want to have kids, I want to have all this stuff. Really what marriage is the formation of a new unit. However, that does not mean that just because you got married, you are no longer commanded to honor father and mother. So if the two are not synonymous of honoring and obedience, what does it mean to honor after I have started a new family unit? Here you go. Honoring is a giving of respect or a giving of a place of esteem in your life. To honor our parents today looks a lot different in Kelly and my life than it did when we were children. When we were children, we honored our parents by being obedient. Now, we honor our parents in a different way. Let me give you some practical ways. We honor our parents, number one, because of despite their shortcomings, despite their mistakes, we try never to put them in a bad light in front of their grandkids. We try never to let anyone else know of what their shortcomings, what their failures might be. We give them a special place in our home. We don't give them a home, we give them a special place in our home. They have the right to be able to come and to visit. They got to pick up the phone and call first, but they have the opportunity to come and visit. Honoring in our home with our parents now means that sometimes we hold our tongue. Sometimes the most honorable thing we can do is simply hold our tongue. Honoring our parents means that we model to our kids what we want them to do to us. If we want our kids to honor us, then we show them what honor looks like. We never say a bad word in our home about grandma and grandpa. Now, privately, Kelly and I might say, oh, man, I don't want to be like that, But when we are in front of the grandkids, everything is good. Everything is positive about grandma and grandpa. Let me put it to you in terms like this. At the graduation last night, students one by one came across the stage. This student's going to the University of Alabama. This student's going to the University of Missouri, so on and so forth. This student received this scholarship, and this student received this award. You know what was missing in all of that honoring? Never one time did a student walk across the stage and they say, listen, this student is going to the University of Missouri. They have this great scholarship. They're going to accomplish all these things. But they were arrested for a DUI 2 years ago. Not one time did they ever say, hey, listen, this student is going to go and do sports over here, and they've accomplished all of this, but they got caught egging somebody a few years back in October. Now, it would have been a lot more interesting had they done it that way. But that's not what they did. When they honored them, they left out the bad part and they highlighted the good. Here's what I mean. All of us are fallen creatures. As a parent, you're a fallen creature. Your parents are fallen creatures as well. Honoring them means that you highlight what has gone well. You highlight their strengths to your kids, and you allow the other things to go unnoticed. Honoring your parents, especially when those parents might not have been good role models, doesn't mean that you continue with the same bad choices. Honoring your parents when they're not good role models doesn't mean that you follow in their footsteps. Honoring your parents when they have not given you a good representation of the character of God doesn't mean that you go down the wrong path that they have chosen to go down to, or does it mean that you are always obedient to them. It means that you give them a place of dignity in your home, and your life will be blessed for it. It's difficult, I think, at times because God speaks in perfect terms, doesn't He? Honoring father and mother would be a lot easier if father and mother were always worthy of honor. By the way, that should be a great charge to every parent in the room today. Be honorable to your kids. Give them something to honor. Make it easier on them by showing them the right things. When our parents were great examples of faith, it's easier to follow in their example and to bring honor to them. However, when they were not great examples of our faith, we still give them a place of respect and dignity, even if we choose to go a different path. The command is difficult because we don't like to see our heroes fall. You know, as children, our parents are our superheroes. But here's what happens as we age, the cracks in their character begins to stand out. Just like the cracks in your character begins to stand out to your kids. And it's always tough to know how to honor when your heroes have fallen. So let me leave you with this morning. I'll only leave you with this. To bestow honor to your parents, children, adults, is an intentional choice in your life. Your parents aren't worthy of honor, and neither are you. But God has commanded it, and therefore you should give it. You give them a place of respect and esteem in your home because it will go well with you when you do. Stand with me reverently and let's pray. Father, thank you